Hey, everyone. So we obviously spend a lot of time talking about the headlines, talking about what's happening with with Iran and with Hezbollah and Lebanon and Gaza and all that stuff. And what often happens is that there are other very important stories going on in the Middle East that have impact on the whole geopolitical chessboard. And if we don't drill down on them, we don't really understand them. So there was an article sent to me today by Amin Ayoub. He is a Middle East expert. He writes for the Middle East Forum. A buddy of mine sent it to me in Ynet, an Israeli publication. And the title of the piece is "The Secret U.S. Plan to Turn Morocco into Israel's Western Shield." And that's what we're going to drill down into today. We're not going to read this article because he doesn't do much of a job giving all the necessary background information to understand what he's actually talking about. So I decided that I'm going to, lay all this out for you so that we can understand the critical importance of the Morocco-Israel and Morocco-US relationship. That's what this video is going to be about. Okay, so let's hit it. Okay, we're going to take this off the screen and let's start right here. In early January, of this year, January 2026, Israel and Morocco signed a joint military work plan for 2026. Okay, Israel and Morocco. And that includes year-round military dialogue, joint industrial projects for defense, strategic alignment on threats. Morocco already buys a lot of its air defenses from Israel, and it has a lot of cooperation with Israel, buys a lot of Israeli equipment. Now, around the exact same time as this, the United States Senate Armed Services Committee filed a provision in next year's defense bill, what's called the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, which approves the defense budget. And in the NDAA, in Section 1268, that provision orders the Pentagon to draw up a 10-year roadmap to turn Morocco into America's most capable military partner on the entire African continent. So let's take a look. This is Section 1268. And you can see some of what it says here, where it says that no later than 180 days after the enactment of this act, the Pentagon has to create with the United States Morocco roadmap. It has to present a roadmap for defense cooperation for 2026 through 2036. And the elements of this are quite significant. Options for establishing cooperative security locations in Morocco, a roadmap to deepen collaborative counterterrorism cooperation across the region, a plan to optimize joint readiness, including a consideration of the feasibility and advisability of cost sharing to refurbish strategic air command runways, Moroccan force modernization through the procurement of United States defense articles, meaning U.S. equipment to make Morocco's Morocco's military even more modern, the establishment of an all-domain range complex, and more. Okay, so there's all this stuff in here about beefing up the Moroccan military as an important American initiative. Okay. So you have Israel in January, around the same time, you have the Senate approving this, and they're both deepening their military and defense ties with Morocco. So it's obviously not a coincidence. By the end of this video, you're going to see it all as part of something much bigger that's happening across the entire region right now. So let's get into it. Here's the first thing you need to understand. And it's the thing that will explain why you've probably never thought about Morocco in the context of Israel at all. Almost every Arab-Israeli story that you follow is downstream of the question of the Palestinians, right? It's always part of the conversation, right? In Lebanon, you have Hezbollah, and they're defending, the Palestinians or combating Israel because of the Palestinians. And then you have, of course, Gaza, and even in the Gulf states, when they talk about Israel, when there's negotiations, when there's talk of normalization, the Palestinian question is always in the room. But Morocco's relationship with Israel has nothing to do with that. It never comes up. It's not part of the conversation. For Morocco, they have a different issue that they've been dealing with for a long time. It has nothing to do with Gaza, nothing to do with, with any of that. And it has to do with their relationship with Algeria, or their bad relationship with Algeria, because that fight between Morocco and Algeria is not part of what everyone thinks about when they think about Middle East conflict, but it's actually a very serious conflict. Okay, quick background, because we need to know this to understand everything else. In December 2020, December 2020, so 5.5 years ago, Morocco became one of the Abraham Accords countries. It normalized relations with Israel, but unlike some of the other Abraham Accords deals, the normalization with Morocco joining the Abraham Accords had a very specific price tag attached for the Americans and the Israelis. In exchange for normalizing with Israel, the United States recognized Moroccan sovereignty over a territory called Western Sahara. Now, if you've never heard of Western Sahara as an actual place, not just a region, don't worry, most people haven't, but it's the single most important piece of land, politically speaking, in Morocco's entire worldview. Okay, and so here's where it gets interesting. Let's take a look on a map first and take a look at the Western Sahara. Okay, so here's a map. Here's Africa, and here's Algeria. Here's Morocco, and you see here there's this dotted line between Morocco and a place called Western Sahara. Now, there is no such country called Western Sahara, and that's what this story is all really about. Okay. Western Sahara used to be a Spanish colony. When Spain pulled out in 1975, Morocco moved in and annexed it as part of Morocco. Now, ever since then, Morocco's neighbor, Algeria, has backed an independence movement called the Polisario Front. Now, Polisario it's this weird acronym, okay? It doesn't mean anything. It's this acronym. And the Polisario Front is like this secular sort of Marxist freedom fighters who are fighting for Western Sahara independence, to make Western Sahara its own country. Now, you might ask yourself, why would Algeria back these guys fighting for Western Sahara independence? Now, if you ask the Algerians, they'll say, oh, we believe in the self-determination of all peoples. Algeria fought its own war of independence against France. And so it's, they say that they always support liberation movements. They just tend to be Marxist liberation movements. And of course, they support, the Palestinians, for their self-determination and various other African independence struggles. Again, usually when we're dealing with some Marxist insurgents. But the Algerians always say that they support self-determination movements. And there's some truth to that, but the more serious regional analysts will tell you that that's not the reason that Algeria backed the Polisario rebels. In 1963, so that's 12 years before before Western Sahara, before the Spanish pull out of Western Sahara. Right after Morocco and Algeria both got their own independence, they had a war. The war was called the Sand War. It was a border war between, again, Morocco and Algeria. Algeria lost that war. And ever since then, the Algerians, the military and the political leadership have always wanted to take revenge or even the score with Morocco. So there's a lot of bad blood between Algeria and Morocco. So in 1975, when Morocco annexed Western Sahara, and there's now this new insurgent group fighting for independence, so the Algerians stepped in to support that group that was fighting for independence. They wanted Morocco to have a problem. They wanted Morocco to be fighting, and so that they could never become the unchallenged power of North Africa. Meaning, Algeria doesn't like Morocco. They want to challenge Morocco's power. So if there's rebels fighting against Morocco for their independence, they're going to support them. There's actually a quote attributed to a former Algerian president, Boumediene, who said the quiet part outside. He said he wanted to make Western Sahara into, quote, a pebble in Morocco's shoe. He wanted to irritate them. Now, you can see how seriously both sides of this rivalry between Algeria and Morocco take their contentious relationship by looking at what they're spending. Morocco has allocated over $17 billion towards its military modernization, much of it building a domestic defense industry through partnerships with Israeli companies. And back in April 2025, the State Department approved an $825 million sale of Stinger missiles. That's what this is about. Look at this. There's a news release from Defense Security Cooperation Agency approving a sale. This is from, again, back. This is just a year ago, approving the sale of these Stinger missiles. So Morocco's been investing a lot. That's 600 Stingers, and in this document it refers to Morocco as a major non-NATO ally of the United States. That's a designation that Morocco has had since 2004, over 20 years. And every year since 2004, the United States and Morocco have run something called Exercise African Lion. And that is the largest annual joint military exercise on the entire African continent. Okay, that's Morocco and the U.S. I bet a lot of Americans don't realize how much cooperation there is between Morocco and the U.S. Again, they're really the number one defense and security ally of the U.S. in the African continent. And this exercise, this African Lion exercise that takes place every year, we're talking about thousands of troops, live fire drills, F-16s, B-1 bombers, tank operations. In recent years, there have been over 40 participating and observer nations. NATO members come to it. 21 years of this exercise every year, every single year. So what's happening in the NDAA with America saying that they want to ramp up this cooperation with Morocco is not a pivot. It's not new. It's something that's been building for a long, long time, for multiple decades. Now, Algeria, they've spent $25 billion on its military, more than a fifth of its entire national budget. Okay, more than it spends on education and health combined. Okay, so Algeria and Morocco have this very sharp rivalry. They do not have an open border. They do not have diplomatic relations. These countries hate each other. Now, I should also add parenthetically that this has nothing to do with religion, which is a rarity in this part of the world. These are both Sunni majority states. They had a border war in 1963. There's a grudge between them, and that's rare in this region because usually religion has nothing to do with anything. But it actually enters the picture a little bit here. So you have the lay of the land here. You have this Western Sahara annexed by Morocco. The world doesn't really recognize it as Moroccan territory, but it's governed by Morocco. There's these like Marxist militants who are fighting for their independence against Morocco. They're backed by Algeria, and the real reason Algeria is doing it is just to destabilize Morocco. Morocco was also a very close working ally with the United States. Algeria is in bed with the bad guys, and that's where Iran enters the story. Okay, so Algeria and Iran have had a relationship going all the way back to the early days of the Islamic Republic. Algeria actually was the mediator for the release of the American hostages in Tehran in 1981. And for years afterwards, the two countries stayed close. And their bond had to do with being anti-West and anti-Israel. Okay. The relationship went cold during a civil war in Algeria. So Algeria had its own civil war in the 1990s, and that civil war was religious. And the Algerian government is kind of secular Marxist, and there was this Islamist insurgency, and it was a bloodbath. No one cares because, if Israel kills a few people, everybody cares. But there was something like 200,000 people who were killed in this civil war. And the Iranians were backing the Islamist insurgents against the Algerian government. So they cut off diplomatic ties. They had a rupture in their relationship, but then by like the year 2000, they had patched things up. And over the last few years, Algeria has become one of the few places that is very friendly with Tehran, with the Islamic regime. Like Iran's foreign minister, Araghchi, who we see every day now on the news, was in Algeria as recently as last year, working to deepen that relationship because, again, so now they have a working relationship. Okay. So what does the Algeria-Iran relationship produce? Like where have we seen that? Well, here's an interesting little story. When Assad's regime collapsed in Syria in late 2024, we all remember that, when the Assad regime collapsed. So the group, the rebel group, the militia that took over is, of course, Ahmad Ashara or al-Jilani, the new guy in Syria. When his group took over, when they took the city of Aleppo in the taking over of Syria, they captured, get this, 500 Algerian and Polisario Western Saharan fighters who'd been fighting for Assad. Remember, the Assad regime was backed by Iran, was propped up by Iran. So in Syria, fighting against the rebels and trying to preserve the regime, you had these Algerian and Polisario fighters. Now, why were they even there? Why were they in Syria? Because Algeria had stood by Assad. They were part of the Iranian axis that was propping up Assad. So the Polisario, who were the Western Sahara fighters that Algeria backs, sent fighters to Syria to help Assad. Okay? Algeria's foreign minister then flew to Damascus to ask the new Syrian president, Ashara, to release the Algerians and the Polisario guys. And he said no. He said that they're going to be tried like the rest of Assad's captured forces. And during the investigations that followed, it turns out that some of those guys admitted to having trained with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC of Iran. Okay, so you see that Algeria was allied with the Assad regime and the Iranians, and you have Morocco that is very tightly tethered to the Israel-United States axis. Okay, so Morocco cut ties with Iran in 2018, and it has to do with the fact that Iran was in bed with Algeria and Polisario and the rebels. And anyway, so there you go. So that's that piece of the puzzle. And one more piece, because you can't tell any story about any conflict in the Middle East without asking, where are the Turks? The Turks stick themselves into every situation. So what are they doing here? So in this particular situation, in the Algeria-Morocco tension, Turkey is not picking a side. What they do, they actually sort of pick both sides. Morocco buys Turkish drones and armored vehicles, and Algeria just signed 14 separate agreements with Turkey this year, trade, infrastructure, all kinds of things. And so Turkey is basically in bed and in business with both of them. And they've stayed neutral on the Western Sahara question. Okay, so that's where Turkey is. So everyone who has an interest in North Africa, Turkey, China, Russia, the Gulf states, everyone is kind of watching. This is a big issue, like for people in the region, what's going to happen in Western Sahara and Morocco, this whole thing. And if you look on the map and you see where all this is, you see where Morocco sits, and think about what we've been dealing with the Straits of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Look where Morocco is. This is another one of those choke points. You can see why the United States would find it so valuable and so important to have a good, strong, reliable ally right here. When you have hostile countries like Algeria and Tunisia, Libya, these are problematic countries in the Mediterranean, in the Western Mediterranean, and you can see why it would be important to the United States to have a strong ally in Morocco. Okay? We're not done with the story yet. All right, so let's bring this all the way back to where we started. The National Defense Authorization Act, Section 1268, right? Why is Washington doing this right now? Why are they ramping it up right now? So let's look at what Israel has done. Now, if you've watched my channel for a while, especially if you've watched the videos on Israel 365 News that I was making before this channel, before January, you've heard me talk a lot about what's happening in the Eastern Mediterranean. Israel, Greece, and Cyprus have begun running joint military exercises. They have much more defense and security cooperation, maritime security. They really have built a strong alliance. They even have a name for it. It's called the 3+1. They're sharing intelligence, coordinating air and naval security. It's called 3+1 because it's Israel, Cyprus, Greece as the 3, with the United States as the 4th partner. The entire reason for that alliance is to counter the rising threat of Turkey. Okay, Greece doesn't trust Turkey. Israel doesn't trust Turkey. Cyprus is partially occupied illegally by Turkey. Okay, these are all countries that feel threatened by Turkey. And so they've created this security alliance in the Eastern Mediterranean. Turkey's trying to position itself as the next great Islamic power in the region now that Iran has weakened. So Turkey has boots on the ground in Libya. They now have basically have a strong, protectorate, parent state proxy relationship with Syria. They have troops on the ground in Somalia, and they're threatening Greece over territorial waters. And I also mentioned their relationship with Cyprus, that they occupy part of the island of Cyprus. So Washington, Jerusalem, Athens, Nicosia, and Cyprus have built a structure, this 3+1, to box in this Turkish ascendancy. Okay, now hold that thought, and let's go back to the West, to what we're talking about in Morocco. Turkey's always looking to expand, right? Like I said, they have boots on the ground in Libya, which is not far from Morocco. Look, the Trump administration is not just making a smart bet on Morocco. Okay, it's doing the same thing that they also did in the Eastern Mediterranean. What did they do in the Eastern Mediterranean? Why are they part of this 3+1 with Greece and Cyprus and Israel? Because the United States wants to find partners who are actually reliable, who will not go back and forth between the Chinese and maybe the Iranians and talk a good game. Like a lot of these countries in the Middle East we've talked about, like the Saudis and the Egyptians, they're always like playing both sides. And the US needs reliable allies. Okay? In the East, that's Israel. In the Eastern Mediterranean, that's Israel, Greece, Cyprus against Turkey. They're not gonna desert the West. Okay, they're not going to desert the United States. They're not going to go over to the Muslim Brotherhood side. These are not even Muslim countries: Israel, Greece, Cyprus. In the West, it's Morocco. Okay, Morocco against an Algeria that just spent the last few years deepening their relationship with Iran. So it's the same logic here. I hope this is making sense. Trump talks constantly about how well he gets along with Erdogan and with the Qataris and warm handshakes and the photo ops, and they're wonderful people and they're great people. But if you watch where the actual military exercises are and where the real cooperation at the state level is, the U.S. has a base in Qatar, but they're not working hand in glove with the Qataris on defense. They're not arming them. They have a base there. That's not what's happening in Morocco. In Morocco, they're actually having joint military exercises. They're arming them. It's in the NDAA that they want to have a decade-long strengthening of the Moroccan military so that the Moroccan military is stronger than the other armies around it. Morocco's reliable. Okay, the real commitments that the U.S. makes, that's what you have to look at. And they want to do that with countries that won't flip, that won't change sides. And that's what Section 1268 of the NDAA is. It's not really about Morocco's army or drones. Morocco also has a lot of phosphate. It has about 70% of the world's phosphate, which is used for agricultural purposes, but it's also used in the manufacture of certain munitions. The Trump administration is extending a security architecture, a belt of dependable partners stretching from the Atlantic coast of Morocco to the Eastern Mediterranean, all oriented around the same issue, which is They're looking for who they can actually count on long-term in the region. And Israel is part of that structure. So when you see the Israelis going into a deeper security and defense relationship with Morocco at the same time as the NDAA is calling for the US to deepen their relationship with Morocco, that's what you're seeing here. Okay? It's the pattern I keep coming back to. We think we understand the Middle East when we talk about the headlines, but the more context you have, the more you can realize what's actually happening across the Middle East. Morocco's deal with Israel isn't about Gaza or the Palestinians, right? It's not about the other Middle Eastern topics that we usually talk about. It's about containing, it's about their own issues with Western Sahara, being a bulwark against the Marxists and against, by the way, the jihadists. Morocco is much more in like the UAE Abraham Accords mindset. And it's about the United States having secure allies at vital shipping choke points, which of course the mouth of the Mediterranean is. So if you want me to go deeper into this whole issue of the Eastern Mediterranean, the 3+1, the IMEC corridor, what Israel's actually building with Greece, Cyprus, and India, because I haven't touched on those topics in a long time. If you want me to do that, I'm happy to make a video about that. Connecting those dots and explaining that. Let me know in the comments what you think. If you want me to go more into these types of topics. I had one viewer who suggested to me that I do a series of videos just kind of going through country by country and talking about who they are and what role they play and what a little bit of the history is in the Middle East. I thought about maybe doing something like that. And maybe we could see this video as the first in a series. Let me know what you think of this. I know it's a little bit out of the box, this one, but I thought it was valuable to address this issue right now. All right, folks, thanks for watching.